do you think? We should jump back into Circleville?
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, next week, I think so.
I believe, yep, I have a video here for kicking off part 2 as well. So let's do that.
And in August 1977, Mary left her husband and children at home and drove to Florida with her sister-in-law.
Ron had told her he knew who the letter writer was, and he was going to take care of this problem while they were in Florida.
They were en route when they learned that Ron had crashed his truck into a tree after getting that mysterious phone call. The coroner ruled his death an accident, but Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, believed he had been murdered.
Although a number of people told me that he was not a heavy drinker, he had almost twice the legal limit of alcohol in his blood.
Also suspicious, under Ron's body, police found a .22 caliber revolver.
The gun had been fired once, so then the question was he shooting at the letter writer? The sheriff didn't give that any credence at all.
But Paul Freshour kept pushing the Pickaway County Sheriff to take a closer look.
All right, the Circleville Letter Writer Part 2 here. As the video we just shared was a great little introduction to the second part here. In August 1977, 5 months after the first letter arrived in her mailbox, Mary Gillespie and her sister-in-law Karen Freshour took a much-needed vacation. Mary's husband Ron remained in Circleville to look after the couple's children. That night around 10 p.m., Ron answered the ringing phone. He spent a few moments on the line before slamming the phone down. Ron grabbed his .22 caliber revolver. He told his daughter Tracy that he had just received a call from the letter writer and he was going to leave to confront him. He kissed Tracy on top of the head and said he'd be back soon. Then Ron hopped into his red and white pickup truck and sped off down the road. At 10:30 p.m., about a half an hour after Ron Gillespie received a call from the Circleville letter writer, the phone rang at the county sheriff's office. A frantic-sounding caller on the other end of the line, explained that he had just driven past a terrible accident on a road called 5 Points Pike. Police rushed to the scene, which was about 7 miles from the Gillespie's house. There they found Ron Gillespie's truck. It had collided into a tree at head-on speed, high speed. Ron was not wearing a seatbelt and was ejected from the driver's seat into the windshield. He was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead on arrival. He died from massive head trauma and internal injuries. His blood alcohol level was at 0.16, which at the time was 1.5 times the legal limit in the state of Ohio. It looked like Ron had missed the curve of the road, instead driving straight ahead, veering off course into a tree. The coroner said no autopsy was necessary. The revolver Ron had taken with him was discovered under his body. One of its bullets had been fired, but it was never located. Ron's family wondered if he had been in some sort of altercation, then got into a high-speed chase or something. They said Ron knew the area like the back of his hand and drove along 5 Points Pike daily. His loved ones couldn't accept the fact he would crash on a road he knew so well. Those who knew Ron were also confused by the blood alcohol report. Ron was not a heavy drinker at all. His children said he had not seemed intoxicated at all when he left the house. Former prison guard Paul Freshour, his brother-in-law, as we introduced earlier, was especially close to his brother-in-law, Ron. He told Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe that he believed foul play was involved. Sheriff Radcliffe again communicated that Ron's death was nothing more than a tragic accident. Paul Freshour believed Sheriff Radcliffe knew more than he was letting on and accused him of covering up Ron's murder. Paul explained that the sheriff planned to run for National Sheriff's Association presidency. Because of this, he couldn't afford to have a potential crime of such high magnitude go unsolved in his county. The crash appeared to unnerve the Circleville letter writer. After news of Ron's death spread through Circleville, the letters abruptly stopped. Ron Gillespie's death was also affected the personal relationships of those closest to him. In October of 1982, Ron's sister Karen divorced her husband Paul Freshour after 20 years of marriage. Superintendent Gordon Massey and his wife also divorced. Afterwards, Gordon began officially dating Ron's widow, Mary Gillespie. Despite the long-rumored affair between the two, Mary was adamant that their relationship did not start all until then, after the divorces and the death of her late husband. In the years that followed, Mary continued to work as a bus driver at the local school district, yet life didn't return to any sort of semblance of normal. Again, the Circleville letter writer began displaying signs around town and other residents continued receiving letters from the writer in the mail. By December 1982, 5 years had passed since the death of Ron Gillespie, and Mary had received more than 30 letters and postcards from her unidentified harasser. Around Christmas, she received another letter with an unusual threat. The writer wanted Mary Gillespie to marry Gordon Massey within 3 months. They added that if the couple wasn't married by March 1st, Mary would have to visit all of her stops along her route to remove messages that would involve her and her now 13-year-old daughter, Tracy. And this is where we will go to another video.
On February 7th, 1983, Mary Gillespie was driving her empty school bus heading to pick up kids. It's 3:30 p.m. She's about to turn left here on 5 Points Pike when she looks over there and sees a handmade sign on a fence. It talks about her 13-year-old daughter, and it's obscene. So she pulls the bus over here, but when she goes over there to try to pull the sign off the fence, she realizes that it's rigged to twine in a box. She says she takes that box home. She then opens it and gets a shocking surprise.
It was a gun, and it was ready to go off.
When Mary brought the box to the sheriff's office, investigators quickly realized it was a booby trap. Yoakum was in the newsroom when word got out.
And I remember the excitement. From a newspaper perspective, it's a great story. A woman who had been the target of all these letters finds a booby trap with a .25 caliber handgun rigged to it. All reporters would want to cover that story.
Especially if there was a dramatic twist.
Okay, piggybacking off that video that we just displayed, 2 months later on Monday, February 7th, Mary was driving her bus near 5 Point Pike. Her late husband, Ron, had crashed. Mary with a bus full of kids, and this is where I've seen a conflicting thing. I've heard that it was an empty bus, and I've also seen it was a bus full of kids, so different conflicts on that particular one, but I don't know how significant that is. But she noticed a sign on a fence post. Written on a plank of 2x4 plywood, the sign featured a terrible remark about her daughter Tracy and Gordon Massey. Mary stopped the bus and lifted the sign off the post. She put it on the seat beside her and continued her way. After Mary arrived home that day, she studied the sign more closely. Behind it was a black box made from corrugated cardboard. Mary tore open the top of the box. Inside, she saw a handgun held upright by styrofoam. Mary decided to hand it over to the authorities. The handgun was a live .25 caliber pistol rigged in a booby trap. There was one bullet in the gun's chamber and another in the clip. A tripwire had been tied around the handle and trigger of the gun. It was designed to go off when the sign was torn off the box when attached from the post. The gun was positioned to just over 5 feet from the ground. Had Mary ripped the sign down instead of lifting the entire contraption off of the fence post, she could have been killed. Whoever set up the trap had attempted to cover their tracks by filing the serial numbers off the gun. Through microscopic examination, investigators were able to piece together the serial number, and it was traced back to a man from Columbus named Wesley Wells. Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe went to Wesley's resident address where he met his wife. She advised that Wesley had left for his job at the local brewery. The sheriff contacted Wesley's workplace and spoke to him over the phone. Wesley told the sheriff that he had recently sold the gun to his supervisor at his place of employment. The supervisor had wanted the gun for protection as his family was constantly being harassed. The supervisor's name was Paul Freshour. Investigators checked on Paul Freshour's employment records. They showed that Paul had requested a day off the day that Mary Gillespie found the booby trap. A search of the workplace where Paul worked uncovered materials that matched those used to make the trap. When Paul was questioned, he admitted to owning the gun, but said it had been stolen from the garage for some time before the trap was set. He had never reported it missing. Because lettering on the trap sign was similar to that of the Circleville Letter Writer, the sheriff hoped that identifying whoever set this trap would disclose who the writer was. On February 25th, 1983, Paul Freshour was taken to the county sheriff's office for a series of handwriting tests. He willingly complied and also submitted to a polygraph test in an attempt to clear his name. The examiner concluded that Paul failed the test. His handwriting had lots of similarities to the Circleville Letter Writer. Paul was re-interviewed after this, and according to Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe, he admitted to writing about 50 of the Circleville letters. Paul Freshour was arrested for the attempted murder of Mary Gillespie. Sum that up a little bit here. So, Mary Gillespie is, no. That's his sister-in-law, I believe, is if I'm saying that right. Is that right? Sister-in-law? Yeah. Karen was his wife. So this is getting crazy, but yeah, that's what it is. It's his sister-in-law, I believe. Which is odd because if you remember earlier when Ron and Mary were having these issues, they actually went to Paul and his wife, Karen. They worked together to try to catch this David guy that was another bus driver.
Right.
So
That is insane.
I think the crazy part about it is, yeah, it's just like, why would he do that, you know?
Booby trap. That is the craziest thing ever. I mean, obviously, yeah, we knew this person was criminally insane to start with. Then they would do something like that. It, just leads into that. But man, that is messed up. To go out of your way to put this sign up with this horrible writing on it, and then you put a freaking booby trap on there to kill this person, or at least very seriously maim them.
So family ties into that one. A little bit crazy, but like, why would he do it? You know, that was kind of the big question. And in the second part of it, we'll kind of get down to how everything plays out. But that was definitely like the big moment, right? There's a handgun rigged up into a trap, like you said, obviously meant to shoot her when she pulled it off the sign. And the serial numbers were attempted to be filed off.
What's really weird is the request that person, they were asking that person to marry
Gordon Massey.
Yeah. That was such an insane request.
Earlier it was break it off.
And this was 5 years later? Is that right? 5 years after?
Yep, exactly, yep.
Wow. This is so weird that no Hollywood writer would ever think to make something this nuts.
I think the story gets a little bit crazier as you'll see. Then it kind of is like one of those things where you'll have a lot of unanswered questions, but nevertheless.
I can't imagine it being crazy.
I don't know why I had such a hard time explaining the relationship, but it's just one of those nights, I guess.
But they all got similar names, and it's like,
well, it's like Ron, and then you're married, and brother-in-law, sister-in-law, all that.
Yeah.
But point being, it's somebody they knew. But the thing is, like, and what's not explained, and I'm not sure it ever is, like, what's connection to Gordon Massey?
Yeah. Why does he care about Gordon Massey?
And it said he's arrested. So he's arrested for attempted murder now. So I guess what that doesn't mean is, so let's just clarify. He's arrested for attempted murder. That doesn't mean he's arrested for any of that other stuff.
Yeah, actually, so they mentioned they convicted of writing 50 of the letters, but they didn't make it seem like he wrote all the letters.
So Sheriff Radcliffe says he confessed to that. We'll get more into that later. That's disputed. But there's no charges, and I guess there could be charges from those letters, right? Some intimidation. I'm sure there's something, but there's nothing charged per se for the letters. It's just attempted murder.
Wow.
We'll get into what you have, then we'll get back into it, but...
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?